doing Anthos. I think, dovetailing from the discussion Mihai just presented earlier on Anthos and how it fits into our security portfolio, and what Ron was mentioning, our ability to support customers where they are. This really started, and Ron, you can go to the next slide. This started with our technology. Google has had a rich history of building technology for application developers, and not only at Google but more globally. Google was key in pioneering the container revolution a long time ago. A lot of what came out and what was part of containers, especially in the initial came to Google. But specifically when Kubernetes became a thing and Google released Kubernetes and helped launch Kubernetes outside of Google for the rest of the world, one of the things that we brought to the market in 2015, that's already 6 years now, is Google's Kubernetes engine. Google's Kubernetes engine was, taking Kubernetes, which was very popular and growing in popularity at the time, and saying, running Kubernetes can be challenging sometimes, but Kubernetes delivers this amazing distributed infrastructure for customers looking to launch containerized applications. Well, how do we make it simpler to run? How do we make it so that customers can do automatic upgrades and auto healing? How do customers be able to manage the control plane without actually having to run it? And that became very successful, so much so that in 2019 we decided to launch Anthos. Anthos said, while GKE and Kubernetes and GCP is excellent, our motto is around meeting customers where they are. Many customers are in different areas of the life cycle. I work with many customers. Most of my customers are in the startup space that are very advanced, but I also have some customers that are in the process of application modernization and taking legacy applications that were originally written in virtual machines, launching them on top of containers and really modernizing those applications. It takes a little bit of effort. I think we all know this. I think, most people are in the process of modernizing their applications. So to be able to take advantage of some of these modern application development techniques, CI/CD, just-in-time development, many of these modern application development items and global scale require us to revisit how we write these applications. And so Google said, why do we limit our ability to help customers with running Kubernetes on GKE? What if we were able to bring these capabilities to you, our customers, wherever you are? Does that mean running it on-prem? Does that mean running it inside of different clouds? Reality today is that we live in a multi-cloud world. Not because necessarily customers want it, but many application development teams feel like they know their tool sets best. If you're developing on AWS, you want to continue to develop on AWS. If you're developing on Azure, you want to continue to do that. And similarly on-prem. Developers know their tools, and we want to help enable the benefits that we can bring to the table on their tools. And that's really what Anthos is. Next slide, please. So Anthos is delivering a number of capabilities for on-premises data centers, Google Cloud, AWS, Azure, and now most recently any attached cluster. And what we deliver is these core set of capabilities on top of these disparate platforms. Whether it's infrastructure management by delivering Anthos cluster management, Anthos hybrid networking from just a pure Kubernetes standpoint, and then layering some more advanced features on top of that, such as application and service management with Anthos Service Mesh, delivering serverless capabilities, advanced serverless capabilities, previously, again, only available on GCP, now available, outside of GCP, wherever you're running Anthos. Taking Cloud Build, which is our secure build service that Mihai talked a little bit about, to be able to stop, when you have software supply chain attacks, to be able to provide binary authorization so that we can ensure that the code you're running in your clusters is what you actually intended to run. These are some of the capabilities. And then delivering policy management, security management, and operations management. These are core to running any Kubernetes application development platform. And in many cases, figuring out how to do this in disparate environments. So say you have 5 to 10, if you're lucky, Kubernetes environments, how are you going to ensure that each one of these application platforms has a consistent experience? How do you ensure that your information is being encrypted by service-to-service communication? How do you ensure that the way your organization wants the applications to be deployed is actually being kept to? So it's this unified application operations platform with operations management, policy configuration management, and security management. It really ties together the value that Anthos can bring across your application portfolio. Next slide, please. So today, what I just spoke about is a little bit about Anthos, the capabilities it brings to the table, and kind of how we got here. Today, I want to spend a few minutes talking through some of the capabilities that have changed over the past year. I've been at Google for close to 2 years at this point, and when I came to Google, our Anthos platform and our Anthos capabilities were just starting out. We had announced it, we had started building it out, but now many of them have come to bear, and we keep making some enhancements that really make these products first-class citizens in a multi-cloud world. So let's start out with Anthos MultiCloud. Anthos MultiCloud brings GKE, Google's Kubernetes engine, to AWS and Azure, and this enables you to have a consistent user and management experience in a multi-cloud environment with a unified GCP control plane. Let me walk through for a second what that means. So on the left, in the image in front of you, you can see customers running GKE clusters. They're running it on Google Cloud. Very happy to be able to leverage that. But what about your applications that are deployed inside of AWS or Azure? Your data is living in any of those environments. You can use Anthos to deploy Google's Kubernetes engine into each of those environments, and those Kubernetes clusters will take advantage of the native cloud services of those providers, whether it's AWS or Azure. You will use their native load balancers, the native IAM capabilities to be able to manage permissions and all. And then the actual virtual machines are all automated and deployed and managed by Anthos living inside of those environments. And then the beauty of it is by leveraging in the top part of this image these capabilities, which is the Cloud Console in GCP, the G-Cloud CLI, the Terraform provider that we have for GKE. You can have all your GKE clusters managed from a single control plane using the same experience and using the same set of commands, the same code, and all of your whatever you have provisioned, you can provision from a single location, which makes managing and operating these clusters pretty easy. Next slide, please. So one of the key capabilities of Anthos MultiCloud is having a Git policy repository. So one of the key foundation pillars of Anthos is Configuration Manager, Anthos Configuration Manager, also known as ACM. Now, ACM allows you to set GitOps policy and configuration management. What you do is you set your configuration as code and say, I want my Kubernetes deployments, I want my clusters to look like this. I want to have these permissions so that, for example, if I'm a developer, I can't write a privileged container because privileged containers may give access to the application that's too great and it creates a security risk. So I can have configuration as code and then use source control and say, here is my configuration, check it into a repo, and that repo is deployed to all of my clusters. And if, say, somebody goes in and changes one of the policies and changes one of the configurations manually on any of those clusters, you can be ensured that Anthos Config Manager will go and roll it back. And by doing this, you're getting a hierarchical policy tree, and obviously it plugs easily into CI/CD pipelines. Now, why this is really valuable is, this has been around, is a capability that's been around for a while, but now we're able to support not only GKE clusters, not only Anthos GKE clusters, so if you have GKE running in another cloud, but say you have EKS clusters or AKS clusters running on Azure or AWS already that are deployed into those environments, you can manage the policies of those clusters from Anthos directly using ACM. Next slide, please. Anthos on bare metal brings that capability that we have in Anthos in clouds and takes it to bare metal environments, where all you need to bring is a Linux VM or a Linux server, and we can install and manage Kubernetes on top of that server. Some of the key capabilities that we launched recently for Anthos on bare metal includes the ability to do workload identity support, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. Containerd as the default runtime for Anthos on bare metal. We now support the ability to have a registry mirror. So instead of having a registry live in GCP and pulling your container images over the WAN, and having issues with how much time does that take, and also tying up precious bandwidth, you can have a local registry mirror and then launch workloads by pulling container images directly from that registry mirror that lives inside of your environment. Cloud audit logging is now built in and available inside of Anthos and bare metal. We started supporting, and again, we'll talk a little bit more about this later, deploying VM-based workloads. So we support KubeVirt, so you can actually have VM-based workloads being supported by Anthos. And most recently is also this ability to do egress NAT gateway, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the networking section. One of the key things that customers wanted to see out of Anthos and bare metal is many customers want to be able to run Anthos inside of edge locations. So edge locations, whether it be supermarkets, restaurants, and any other kind of edge location use cases. We had a previously minimum requirement of 2 nodes running 4 CPUs and 32 gigs of RAM, which is good for really like a data center. But when you have those requirements for an edge location, it's too high. So we were able to drop that by 50%, making it where you can run Anthos and bare metal with simply 1 node, 2 CPUs, and 4 gigs of RAM. Next slide, please. For Anthos on VMware, which was our first on-prem Anthos solution for customers that run Anthos on VMware, we support many different platforms. We support 6.5, 6.7, and most recently the new 7.0. And some of the key capabilities that we deployed this year was the ability to do cluster backup and restore, so that you can actually manage the admin part of what's running inside of your VMware environment. We also launched Windows Container Support, which is a big win that we'll talk about in a few minutes. And one piece I wanted to focus on is our cluster autoscaler, which went into preview this year. What it does is, for customers that are in GCP, you'll know what this is, but our cluster autoscaler allows you to monitor the state of the cluster, and instead of over deploying, that is very common on-prem, you can deploy the number of nodes that are required to run your application at a normal state. And you give it a min and a max node. Maybe your min is five nodes and your max is 20 to 30 nodes. And it will scale up the number of nodes and actually spit up new nodes as necessary for a given workload to be able to have enough compute power to be able to run your applications. So you're having the ability to spin up and down nodes based on your application requirements, and it works on a per node pool basis. So you don't have to spin up the whole cluster. You can have different node pools for different applications and spin those up as necessary. Next slide, please. Windows Server container support is one of the things that I mentioned that gives customers the ability to use consistent development and deployment across hybrid cloud environments. So previously, if I wanted to run Linux containers and Windows containers side by side, I needed to have two different clusters, two different workload pools to be able to have these deployed. Now I can have a single cluster and deploy Windows and Linux containers both as first-class citizens on Anthos inside of VMware environments, as well as Anthos on bare metal, and be able to use Windows and Linux containers together, which gives you, a single pane of glass management across the workloads and improve resource utilizations, because now you can bin pack many different workloads together. Next slide, please. Anthos Connect Gateway is one of our capabilities that recently went into GA that allows you to manage all of your Kubernetes clusters and the tools that are going to manage them from a single place. So previously, if you want to have multiple clusters deployed in multiple different locations, how do you get access to those to be able to manage them? In many cases, customers are deploying VPNs that are hard to set up, or are deploying jump boxes that create security vulnerabilities and other issues in these locations to be able to access them. Well, we simplified this quite a bit by having the Anthos Connect Gateway. All your clusters can connect into the Anthos Connect Gateway and are authenticated locally on the local environment using the Connect Gateway. So you connect to the gateway, and the gateway proxies your requests directly to your cluster, which provides a secure and simplified way to be able to manage and authenticate and authorize your services running on those platforms. Next slide, please. So software-defined networking is a big story in Anthos. This is more of an overview. I could spend an entire session going over the different capabilities of networking in Anthos, and a lot of the value really lies in that, because not only does Anthos allow you to do multi-cloud and have multiple environments running in different clouds and different environments, but if you're going to be managing a global workload or many workloads, you're going to have many clusters. And how do you manage those from multi-cluster capability? So how do you have services that say live across clusters? How do you have load balancers that can send proper traffic to the proper cluster, not only within a cluster? These are many of the capabilities that Anthos provides outside of just the core multi-cloud capabilities that we're speaking of so far. So, things like software-defined networking stack that's really advanced for VMs and containers. We started supporting VMs this year. Layer 2 through 7 networking and security stack to be able to support, whatever load balancer or whatever layer you want. That's really based on Kubernetes open source networking capabilities. We have a high-performance networking data plane with our data plane V2 that's based on Cilium, and cluster and node network firewalling to provide at the infrastructure layer, as well as at the workload layer, a certain element of security that's really not found in other products. Next slide, please. So Anthos Network Gateway and Data Plane V2 are two very big features that were launched this year. The Anthos Data Plane V2 is our CNI that's based on Cilium. It provides overlay capabilities both inside of GCP and for hybrid cloud use cases. It provides network security and observability, so you can understand what traffic's running on your network and on your applications and within your applications. And it does this at a very high performance using eBPF. The Anthos Network Gateway in preview, this provides many of the core capabilities that enable multi-cloud and hybrid cloud networking capabilities. So say, for example, your applications are deployed on-prem and living inside of GCP, how can you provide hybrid networking capabilities? So the Anthos Network Gateway can be deployed into multiple environments, and it gives you features such as egress net this multi-cluster connectivity where you can have workloads that are living in both places, and it will properly route your request to the proper location. You can have hybrid secure connectivity using the Anthos network gateway as well as L3 flat networks, and everything is routed properly. Next slide, please. Anthos config management, I spoke about earlier, provides you the ability to leverage Git to be able to control and check in your configurations and then make sure they're deployed to the proper locations. What I want to focus on here is the new capability with our config controller as a hosted service. So Kubernetes is nice when everything lives inside of Kubernetes. Say, for example, you want to launch a Kubernetes workload that's a front end, that's something that your application development team, and they want to take advantage of a Google Cloud back-end service, such as Cloud SQL, such as Cloud Storage. So how do you take advantage of that? How can you say in your application inside of Anthos, I want to be able to leverage a native cloud service without calling out that cloud service? That's what Cloud Config Controller allows you to do. So you can say inside of your application, give me a database. As simple as that in using Kubernetes Resource Management Language, which is the standard for how to request resources inside of Kubernetes. And we'll do the translation to say, give me a database means I want a Cloud SQL database, and this is the kind of database that we give when somebody asks for one. So the developer doesn't have to know all the GCP lingo for databases that you've already figured out. All they have to do is say, give me a database, and we're doing all the plumbing to make sure that capability works out. Next slide, please. ACM multi-repo support is another very important feature for ACM. So I mentioned earlier how you as the platform operator can define what your configuration is going to look like, and it'll be enforced across all your Kubernetes clusters. Well, that works really well at the admin level, but what about from an operator standpoint? So you want to be able to say, these are my policies for all my Kubernetes clusters, and then you want to delegate control for the local application to the operator. So I, as the admin, I want to be able to say, I want all my applications to be secure. I don't want the wrong configurations to be deployed in a way that creates a security vulnerability for my organization. I don't want it to be deployed in a way that creates a very unstable application environment for myself or other applications. But I still want my application developers to be able to say, within their environment, these are my configs, and to have that same capability of those configs being pushed down to their application. So ACM multi-repo support allows you to do that, where you can have multiple repos synced for an application, and each operator only has control of their local application environment. Next slide, please. Anthos Service Mesh is based on Istio, and it's our ability to deliver a service mesh in a simplified manner. Many customers want to take advantage of Service Mesh for the capabilities it gives them, both observability and the ability to route traffic intelligently. Istio gives that to you, but with the added overhead of being able, of your need to manage Istio, which is not an easy undertaking. And so what Anthos Service Mesh allows you to do is, we'll manage and support the control plane. We'll even manage and control the Envoy proxies based on release channels and maintenance windows, and we'll keep everything up to date, the way you're used to it with GKE and the way we do auto healing and auto upgrades. We'll do all that for the Anthos Service Mesh capability, and then you can leverage it. You can use the certificates and deploy certificates and ensure there's MTLS encryption. You can do SRE dashboards with SLO management, security dashboards, without having to manage all the underlying platform. Next slide, please. Anthos Identity Service is something new that came to the forefront this year. And what it allows you to do is, you have your identity solutions, whether it's LDAP, OIDC, and you don't want to have to rewrite them or re-implement them for each time you have a workload that you're deploying. And so Anthos Identity Service says, we will connect you to your cloud identity, your LDAP solutions, your AWS, your other cloud identity solutions, and then pipe those into Anthos for proper RBAC controls. Next slide, please. Similarly, Anthos Workload Identity is really big because previous to Workload Identity, if you have a service that needs to connect to another service, how do you properly authenticate those two against each other? You would typically have your credentials stored inside of your application, and this would create security issues because you don't want to have long-lived application credentials within your environment, within your application. So Anthos Workload Identity says you can register your cluster and your workloads against cloud services and use IAM and federation support to be able to have credentials that are pulled on the fly and are only used for that workload and are authenticated individually for that workload. So this provides the ability to take those long-lived credentials out of your application. Next slide, please. And finally, one of the exciting things that we're excited that recently came to fore. So we spoke a little bit about Cloud Build. Cloud Build is our serverless cloud build solution that takes your repo and will build your application deployments for a CI process. Google Cloud Deploy recently came out this year as the ability to do CI/CD, so it'll do the full CI/CD. And coming soon, that's actually in preview in Q4, is our on-prem multi-cloud capability. So many customers want to be able to run their source control in their environment without any connectivity to GCP. They don't want to be able to run cloud builds inside of GCP, but want to run it on their environment. Hybrid Pool, which is going to be GA very soon, allows you to run Cloud Build and Cloud Deploy on-prem in your environment, totally disconnected from GCP. Next slide, please. Finally, Migrate for Anthos and GKE has been around for a while. It allows customers to migrate intelligently to native from VMs to containers. We spoke about it earlier. Refactoring containers is difficult to do. While this doesn't work for all situations, many VMs work really well as containers, and all they need to do is be refactored into a container environment, and that's what Migrate for Anthos and GKE does. We recently launched the Migrate Fitness Assessment tool that will tell you how good of a candidate your workload is. And we also recently announced enhanced container runtime with support for Cloud Run, so you can actually turn your VM into a serverless container where it makes sense. So that's it for my discussions today. To get started, here are some resources.